I'm very excited to introduce Erin Kinsella. Erin?
Thank you so much for the wonderful welcome. I'm going to hold my mic up here because these are old, it's an old set of headphones. So can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Good, perfect. So before I kind of share a little bit with you, I can show you this. If you can't, I don't know if you'll be able to see it. Maybe not. If I put it in front of my face, I can share it. I can send it to you. You could share it on your Facebook page or something after, because I don't think you'll be able to see it here. But it's actually a picture of my auxiliary bishop giving a copy of the book to the Holy Father. Which is amazing. So a couple weeks ago, he went and he had offered to take a copy with him to present to the Holy Father. So whether he will read it or not, who knows? But it was in his hands for a time. So that's exciting nonetheless. Um, so I just wanted to start out by saying a big thank you to all of you, Sarens. I'm familiar with the work that you do, of course. I used to be the director of campus ministry at the University of Toronto. And I've been working with young people for many years. And of course, that's a time when young people are discerning their vocation. And Sarah, the Sarah Club has just done such amazing things in promoting vocations and in supporting vocations in the church. So thank you for all of the work and the commitment that you have towards promoting vocations in the church. And today I'll share just a little bit of my own vocation story to give a little bit of background, and then I'll share a bit about consecrated virginity, about the history of it, and some things that are helpful to know. And then I'll also share some current kind of trends that are happening in terms of consecrated virginity now, as well as some challenges that are present for the vocation in our time. And then I'm certainly open to questions. So I am happy to answer any and all questions about the vocation. It's a great joy to be able to speak about it. So I'm more than happy to do that. And I'm also happy if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask offline. I'm happy to provide my email address, or you can always go to, there's a website called espousedtochrist.com. And that's the website that I created for the book, but it does have a contact form there and all kinds of resources about consecrated virginity and consecrated life in general. So that's a great place to check if you're looking for resources, or if you know any young women, especially who are discerning. It's a great resource for them to be able to find things that might be helpful for them in their discernment. So that's my beginning intro. And so, just to share a little bit about me, I grew up in a Catholic family. I did all the sacraments when I was growing up and went to Catholic schools in Canada. My dad was in the RCMP, so one of the Mounties, and we lived all kinds of different places across the country, which was a gift, but also was challenging because I kind of was planted in different churches along the way, different faith communities, and we were there usually for a few years at a time. And so I was growing in my faith, but I also didn't really encounter the Lord in a personal way, in a way that I knew him personally and that I knew the depth of his love for me. And so I was kind of typical in the sense of high school and university. I kind of stopped practicing the faith really. I wasn't going to mass, and I still always considered myself Catholic, but it was more of kind of a cultural thing, or I just grew up as a Catholic. And so I kind of still took that identity on, which is pretty common for a lot of people, for a lot of young people even. And I had studied virology, so I wanted to go around the world curing the world of deadly contagious viruses. And I studied Ebola, and my virus that I studied was Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever virus. It was very exciting, and I was really excited for that. But in my time in grad studies, I was actually down in Texas in Galveston at the level 4 lab in Galveston for a little while, and everything for me just fell apart. And now, when I look back on it, of course, in the time, it was so painful. But now, when I look back on it, I'm so grateful because it was exactly the thing that brought me back into the merciful arms of the Lord. And for me, in that time of pain where everything was falling apart, the thing that I did was turn back to the church, because everything else in my life was kind of sliding around under my feet, and it was the only firm thing that I really knew. And and I started going back to mass, and then I came back to Canada, got involved at our parish, had a profound encounter with the Lord in the sacrament of reconciliation. So just as the priest was saying those words of absolution, it was like I encountered the Lord for the first time as a person. And I knew in that moment the depth of his love for me, and how I was forgiven of all of these sins. I didn't even know the weight of them that I was carrying around, but it was like breathing for the first time. It was like experiencing freedom for the first time. And so everything in my life changed. And instead of asking myself, what do I want to do with my life? The question became for me, Lord, what do you want me to do with my life? What's your plan for my life? And of course, as many kind of new reverts or converts are, I was insane for a period of time after my conversion and just wanted to do everything Catholic and be the most Catholic. And I was super pumped. And I was like, everybody around me has to be Catholic. And I was like, okay, Erin, you need to just chill a little, just relax, just work on your prayer life, work on your relationship with the Lord. But I did have this sense, even right from the beginning of that first encounter with the Lord, that my heart was created for him, and it felt like the things in my life, that nothing could ever take that place um that was created for him, and like I was created to belong to him alone. And so I went to visit some religious communities even shortly after my kind of reversion, and felt a real sense of coming home. But certainly I also recognized that I was like a baby Catholic. I needed to know how to pray. I needed to know how to discern. I needed to know what it meant to grow in virtue and to live a life of discipleship with the Lord. And so for a number of years, I worked for the church. I ended up working in ministry and moved to Ottawa. And then while I was in Ottawa, I met a group of sisters called the Servants of the Cross. And so some of you may know the Companions of the Cross. They're in Texas and some other places. And but they're from Ottawa originally, so they were founded here. And so I joined the Order of Sisters, who was kind of working with them. And I was there for a year and a half, and it was one of the most beautiful and difficult times of my life, I would say. Beautiful because it really cemented my prayer life, my experience of praying the Liturgy of the Hours, of all of the things that kind of go into consecrated life, into this life that's totally given for the Lord in this way. And that was beautiful. And then it was also very difficult because the community was just starting up. And I usually share this with young people in my when I give talks on vocations, because because sometimes people will hear stories about beautiful vocations journeys and things like that, but often the path can be very painful, and there can be things that are really difficult. And for me, that was an experience of when I left the community. It was really painful, and I left with a number of wounds. And so for a few years after that, the Lord really was bringing me through this time of healing and just kind of peeling back layers and offering this healing. And so, my heart at that point, with those wounds that I was carrying, I really wasn't able to discern my vocation or to receive it as a gift from the Lord. And I remember when I moved to Toronto, and then I ended up going to just a young adults retreat with the Sisters of Life, who are dear friends of mine. I love that community. Um, their charism of life and of healing is such a gift to the church. And so I went on a retreat with them, and one of the sisters said something very simple, like, sometimes we just want something from the Lord, but we don't actually ask him for it. And I was like, okay, Lord, I'm going to ask you. So in adoration that night, I just asked the Lord, like, Lord, I feel like there's this veil on my heart, that's separating from me from you somehow. And I just want to know your love in the depths of my bones. And it was this honest prayer, and the Lord answered it in that moment. Even He took this veil that I had felt between us and really renewed this sense of intimacy between us, and gave this healing in this moment, which was so beautiful. And almost right away from that moment, I started having a sense of like, oh, Lord, you're calling me to consecrated life. Like, I really sense this. And I feel like my heart was created for you, to belong to you alone, and that nothing else will do. And so I started discerning again with religious orders, with the Sisters of Life. I went to the Religious Sisters of Alma, the Sisters of Mercy of Alma. I went to like a number of different religious orders, and it was also very painful because everywhere I was going, it was like the door was shutting for one reason or another. Like either there wasn't a call to the particular charism of the community, or something was happening with the community and they weren't accepting new applicants at the time, or all of these things. And I was so frustrated. I was like, oh, Lord, I don't know what you want me to do. Like, I feel like you're calling me to belong to you, and I'm trying, and you're shutting every door, and I don't know what you're doing. So it was really painful for a long time, but through that, I ended up actually meeting with Cardinal Collins, who was the ordinary in Toronto at the time, and I was still in Toronto at that time. So I explained to him kind of what some of these desires of my heart and what I was experiencing, and he said, "Oh, actually, it sounds like consecrated virginity, maybe." I was like, okay. And I had heard of consecrated virginity before, because someone else I knew in Toronto actually received the consecration and became a consecrated virgin. And I was there at her consecration mass. And as it often is with the Lord, at her consecration mass, this was a few years before I met with Cardinal Collins, I remember being at that consecration mass and saying, Lord, thank you that you're not calling me to that vocation, because it seems like the worst vocation. There's no husband to kill bugs. There's no religious community to look after you when you get old. And I remember having that thought. And then when I met with Cardinal Collins and he mentioned consecrated virginity, in that moment, I really experienced this new openness to the vocation in my heart that was much different. And so I met with Bishop Boissonneau, who is the delegate for the Ordo Virginum in Toronto, and I started formation, and I did a few years of formation, and then I was consecrated on the Feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross in 2019, which was such a gift. And so since that time, I have fibromyalgia, so I wasn't able to continue working in the job that I was in, and ended up coming back to Ottawa to be closer to family. So my association with the Ordo Virginum has now been transferred to Ottawa. So that's where I officially am. So that's kind of my own story. And I share that just as a preface, because I think it's helpful to know to kind of recognize when we're talking to young people, some of the ways that people will describe feeling called can kind of give us that clue about where the Lord might be drawing them. So in general, about consecrated virginity, let's kind of touch on that. It's the oldest form of consecrated life in the church. So right from the beginning, there were women who felt called to belong to the Lord alone, and to offer to sacrifice the good of marriage and children, and to dedicate themselves wholeheartedly to the Lord. And in the beginning, there was, of course, less formality. There wasn't a particular rite. There wasn't particular guidelines or anything like that, but we can see in the early martyrology of the church there were a number of virgin martyrs, and those were consecrated virgins: Saint Agnes, Saint Lucy, Saint Agatha, Saint Marcelina. So there were a number of consecrated virgin saints. And then as the church as this vocation grew, the church grew, there grew up these things associated with the consecration of virgins. So an actual rite of consecration, and the vocation right from the beginning, but more solidified as the vocation grew, came to be associated around the diocesan bishop. So the consecrated virgins in his diocese, he would care for them in terms of providing spiritual care and guidance for them. And the diocesan bishop was the one who would admit women to consecration, who would consecrate them. And as the vocation kind of grew, and as monastic life started growing in the church, the consecration of virgins gradually disappeared over the years. And it was around the time of the Second Vatican Council. Before that, in the decades before that, there were some calls from women to kind of bring back this consecration of virgins living in the world. And at the time of the Second Vatican Council, there was a call for this renewed rite to be promulgated. And so, following the Second Vatican Council, the rite of consecration of a virgin living in the world was was renewed and promulgated for our time. So the ancient rite, some of the aspects of the ancient rite were taken, and the rite was revised for our time and was promulgated about 50 years ago. So now there are probably about 5,000 consecrated virgins in the world. In Canada, I don't know how many there are in the US. I should look that up. But in Canada, there are about 50 consecrated virgins right now. But interestingly, probably in the next 5 to 10 years, that number will double. Um, of course, some are older, so they may pass away, but there are many women who are learning about this vocation and who are feeling like they may be called to it. And so, in terms of what consecrated virginity is, or how it fits into the church, or what kind of how does it differ from religious life, for example, or from other forms of consecrated life? And there are a number of things that are different. So, one is that men and women religious will profess vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, as will diocesan hermits or members of secular institutes. Consecrated virgins do not profess vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. The vocation is the whole long title is the consecration of a virgin living in the world. And the in the world part is actually very important to the vocation because in terms of religious life, even for active orders, there is a kind of separation from the world that is constitutive to the vocation and a stepping back from the things of the world. But in terms of consecrated virginity, it is in particular lived in the world. So it's taking that wholehearted, complete self gift of the person to Christ and the reception of Christ, the gift of Himself to me in return, and living that in the world. So I live in the same conditions as all of those that I pray for and that I serve with and serve for. I pay the bills. I sometimes watch a show on Netflix. I go and hang out with friends at a coffee shop. So my life substantially does look quite similar in a lot of ways to all of the people from my parish, for example, because the vocation is lived in the world. And so I don't take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. I couldn't take a vow of poverty anyways, because consecrated virgins are required to support themselves. So before we're consecrated, we have to have a practical meeting with the bishop about what does it look like for me to support myself, to be able to provide for my retirement, to be able to provide for my own needs. So consecrated virgins generally have jobs. Some work in ministry, but many work as teachers. I know one who's a psychiatrist. I know artists, professors, all different kinds of professions consecrated virgins are in. And instead of making a vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience, what the woman does is she gives what's called the sanctum propositum, which is the solemn promise of living this in this state of virginity for her whole life, and indeed into eternity, because the vocation exists into eternity. And in professing this sanctum propositum to persevere in holy virginity for all the days of her life, then what happens is the bishop consecrates that, so consecrates the woman. And so the rite is actually a sacramental, so not a sacrament that we would understand in kind of Catholic terms of making something invisible visible and effecting what it signifies. So that would be a sacrament, but a sacramental is kind of like a vessel of grace, a means of grace. And I just saw a question from someone asking if all consecrated virgins are women, and the answer is yes. And part of the reason for that is that right from the beginning of the church, the tradition of the church saw these women as brides of Christ. There are a number of different ways that the fathers of the church described consecrated virgins: brides of Christ, brides of God, spouse of God, spouse of Christ. So in canon law, consecrated virginity is actually the only consecrated virgin, or the only consecrated vocation where the woman is described as a spouse of Christ. So consecrated virgins are brides of Christ, and also in that the vocation is one that images the church and it images Our Lady, who Our Lady is the ultimate kind of model for consecrated virgins. And consecrated virgins are also an image of the church, who is pure, chaste, virginal, wholehearted bride given to Christ the bridegroom. And consecrated virginity also shares in the kind of eschatological image that consecrated life does, which is to say that consecrated virgins are living now in the relationship with Christ. So in being spouses of Christ, in being given totally to Christ, in being wed to Christ, living now what all of us will live, God willing, in heaven one day, which is to be given body and soul in totality to Christ in this complete union. And so, in living this way, consecrated virgins and other consecrated people can provide this eschatological image, this pointing towards the realities of heaven, by sacrificing or giving up the goods of marriage and children that are also a sign of the relationship between the persons of the Trinity. So, so don't take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. We also don't wear habits. So the signifier, the physical signifier of our vocation is a ring. So we are required to wear a wedding band, which we receive at our consecration. And at our consecration, we also receive a veil, which is the symbol of kind of making something holy, of showing that something is reserved to God alone. And we also receive a copy of the Liturgy of the Hours. So we're asked to pray the Liturgy of the Hours, at least morning and evening prayer. And I'm trying to think of the other basic things that I can share about the vocation, but I'm sure that I've forgotten some, but I'm sure people will ask the questions, which will jog my memory after. So to share, those are kind of some of the basic things about the vocation. And in terms of where things are at now, we can see, I think, that there's a particular power that is possessed by this vocation in our culture, in particular, the living in the world. And it's not in terms of looking at the vocations, every vocation, marriage, consecrated life, priesthood, every vocation has its particular way of imaging the love of God for the world and the call of the human heart to be made whole in Christ the Lord and to live for him alone, right? So every vocation does that. Consecrated virginity, I think, in particular, has a way of doing that that speaks to a culture that tends to divide the body and the soul. So in our time, a lot of people, we can see in a lot of different movements that we reduce the person to, the real me is who is in my head, and my body is just something that carries me around. But I think consecrated virginity actually has a power to speak a word to that and to say, actually, um, your body and your soul are one, and what we do with our bodies matters. And it's possible to live in this world that kind of deifies bodily pleasure or the comforts of the body, and to say, actually, I can be happy and I am fulfilled and completely happy in the Lord Jesus, in Him, and in all of the things that He is. Um, and it has, I think that, I mean, working with young people, we can see how sexualized our culture has become, and in some ways, so many things are just kind of boiled down to relationships or romantic relationships or sexual encounters or things like that. And in some way, I think consecrated virginity is very mystifying to people. Like, if I say I'm a consecrated virgin, people are like, they're like, "What?" And then I explain it a little bit, and you can see the wheels turning, and it really provokes questions in people, which is ultimately such a good thing. Um, and I can just liken this to some of the writing that I've done on suffering, um, which is John Paul II in Salve Fici Doloris talks about the question of why, and that ultimately suffering brings up this question of why, which is beautiful because it opens the human person to an answer from the only one who can give an answer to this question of why, which is the Lord. And he gives us himself. And this is his answer to the question of why. And in that way, I think consecrated virginity can provoke in people that question of how, like, how are you fulfilled in this world without you will never have you will never be married, you will never have it's similar to priesthood, right, similar to religious life, but also in a different way because the person because I'm sharing in kind of the exact elements of all of the people around me, then it adds that kind of dimension to it, right? So the Lord uses all of the different vocations to speak about his love to the world. And so I think that's part of it. And so we do see many more women, even in the 6 years that I've been consecrated. Every time I go and give a talk about consecrated virginity, and then I ask for hands, like, who's heard of this vocation? At first, it was like no people in the room. And then it started to be maybe a couple of people in the room. And then it started to be more and more. So more and more people are hearing about this vocation. And I speak to women, at least one woman a week, who is interested in learning more about the vocation. We've had a lot of interest. We're forming a national association of consecrated virgins here in Canada right now. We've had a lot of interest in that. In Canada in the last six, like since I've been consecrated, I think there have been 12 consecrations in that time across the country. And there are many more women who are in formation now, which is such a beautiful thing. And so those are kind of the trajectories that we're seeing around the world. And we can see this in a wider context in the church where there are trends in some places that have been on increasingly secular trajectories. So, for example, France has seen a marked increase in the number of people coming into the church. In our own diocese here in Ottawa, last year we had double the number of catechumens that we did from the year before. And you can see, I think, a turning point in people where they're looking for something that is real, for something that is stable, for something that is true. There is a desire for that, and so I think people really are considering now, young people, what are you calling me to, Lord? What is true? What is the plan for my life that is something that will not be passing, that will fulfill me in the way that my heart desires to be fulfilled, which is a beautiful thing. So then challenges in for this vocation at this time, and these are really practical things. So I've had the great gift of being able to meet consecrated virgins from Scandinavia. I've met some from South America. I've met many from the US. I know all of them in Canada and all of the candidates. And from a number of other places in Europe as well. And so the challenges are primarily around formation and partly around education in the church. And so I can say something even simple like I asked at my parish if we could change the intentions to praying for an increase to vocations to priesthood and consecrated life instead of to priesthood and religious life, because the term consecrated encapsulates all of the consecrated vocations, all of consecrated life, whereas religious life refers to religious brothers and sisters only. So that's one thing that's just kind of a funny little example, but I think it does speak to. I wrote an article actually for the Pillar, if anybody has a Pillar subscription, so I can refer you to that because it's a little bit more detailed. But it's a challenge to discern a vocation that you don't know about, and so this is where groups like Serra can really come and be such a beneficial gift to the church to help even speak about consecrated virginity, that there is such a thing, and for dioceses to make it known on their websites, for different organizations to be able to know about it. Um, because you can't discern it if you don't have all the information. That's standard St. Ignatius, right? So if women don't know about the vocation, then they can be experiencing this ache in their heart without knowing how to direct the ache in their heart. And of course, the Lord has ways of speaking and the timing of speaking for things, but we all have a responsibility, right, in helping each other to discern the Lord's will in our lives. So that's one challenge. Another challenge in terms of formation is that there's a beautiful document. I highly recommend it. Um, and it's called Ecclesiae Sponsae Imago. So it is a document put forward by the dicastery for consecrated life. And it was put out in 2018. Beautiful document, all about consecrated virginity. It has the whole history of it, the theology behind it, and then it does stipulate some norms for formation. So prior to 2018, it was essentially kind of the Wild West out there. And so some bishops would have like, 5 years of formation, and the woman would go through and do a whole theology course and things like that before she was formed. And some women would approach their bishop and he's like, great, let's set a date next month and you can receive the consecration, which is insane. So the Ecclesia Sponsa Imago kind of put a little bit more meat on the bones about what it means to have proper formation. And it says that those who are interested in consecrated virginity should have an initial 1 to 2 years of what's called aspirancy. And so that would be basically a kind of an investigation into the woman and into of her learning about the vocation and about consecrated life to discern further if there is a likely call to consecrated virginity. And then the following stage is 2 to 3 years, and it's candidacy. And during candidacy, the woman, when she transfers into candidacy or when she applies to be admitted to candidacy, there is a certain sense that she likely is called to the vocation. And then candidacy is more about intentionally forming the woman to live the life of consecrated virginity, which has its own pitfalls. Consecrated virgins, because we're living in the world, and because the world, I saw a comment from somebody to be in the world but not swayed by it, I think, or something like that. But that's exactly it, because it's very difficult to live in the world. I find it difficult to live in the world and to have my heart be a pure and chaste and reserved place for the King of the universe to find a resting place. And then also, I'm seeing ridiculous ads all over the place that assault every sense of purity and holiness that I might have. So there's a challenge about that, and there is a need to form women well in that. And in a similar way to other vocations, in terms of psychosexual development, in terms of how they process their own sexuality, in terms of how they look at relationships and healthy relationships, which are particularly important in the case of consecrated virginity because it's not a communally lived vocation. So I, Erin Kinsella, am responsible for making my own friends. And for having my own support systems, and for making sure that I am involved in community, and that I'm growing in my faith, and that I'm growing in my spiritual life, and that I have a spiritual director, and that I'm taking time for personal retreats, and all of these things I have to be responsible for. And of course I need support and accountability to do that, but I'm on a very wide leash, a long leash, right? So that's an important thing in terms of, excuse me, in terms of forming women for the vocation, is to determine whether they have that maturity and kind of all aspects of their life in order to live the vocation responsibly and well, and to be able to form themselves in all of these different areas. So personally, I'm the one who's in charge of formation in Ottawa. So I've been looking at this a lot, but we look at the same pillars that you would see in seminary formation to make sure that the women will receive the consecration are able to live it well and to be responsible in this vocation. And so, one of the concerns that I have about this vocation, that I've voiced to my own bishops, and hopefully I'll be able to. I'm going to Rome for the Jubilee of Consecrated Life, so I hope to speak to some of the people from the dicastery about it as well. Is that we've seen in the church what happens when there is not appropriate and comprehensive and effective formation for those who are in celibate vocations. And with consecrated virginity in particular, as I said, the woman is on a very long leash. So, how it works is you are attached to your diocese, basically. So, The woman who is consecrated has a relationship with her diocesan bishop. The diocesan bishop is the one who sets the guidelines for formation. He is the one who will admit the woman into consecration. So he's the only one who can do the consecration. It cannot be delegated to a priest. It has to be the diocesan bishop. And there is intended to be a close relationship between the diocesan bishop and between his consecrated virgins, to be a spiritual father to them, and for consecrated virgins, not to seek his approval in the same way as a religious would her religious superior. But for me, if I had major life decisions, I would talk to my bishop and seek his guidance before kind of engaging in any major life decisions. But again, my day-to-day life, I have so much freedom, which is such a beautiful thing because I can follow the Lord in every moment of the day in such a beautiful and free way. And that certainly was one of the attractive things about this vocation, and one of the things that I know my heart was made for. But you can kind of immediately see, right, how that can be a challenge for formation, for guidance for the vocation, for governing of the vocation, when you have a diocesan bishop, for example, who is in Toronto. Like, it's a huge diocese. So you rarely get to speak with the bishop, let alone kind of have as close a relationship with him as might be intended. So that can be a challenge. And then partly a challenge can also be, as I shared about kind of knowing about the vocation in various parts of the world, there are very, very different attitudes towards receptiveness to consecrated virgins. So, for example, in some of the Scandinavian countries, some of the bishops will not consecrate anyone. They have explicitly said that they do not want consecrated virgins in their diocese and will not consecrate anyone. Or if somebody has already been consecrated, then the diocesan, if there's a new bishop and he's not really in favor of consecrated virginity, then they're just not included in anything that the diocese does. And in some places, there are bishops who are happy to have consecrated virgins or women be consecrated, but they have every diocese essentially in the world is making its own formation program right now. So that's the general guidance from the Ecclesia Sponsa Imago document, which was beautiful, does not really go into specifics about the exact things that need to be part of a formation program. So this is a huge challenge, and essentially every diocese in the world is making their own formation program right now, and many are collaborating, which is beautiful. Some places like the US has a national association of consecrated virgins, and they have resources that can help dioceses to put forward things in place. Um, so that's excellent. But you can see kind of how the challenges that might be out there with that. So that's kind of the major lay of the land now, but I'm definitely happy to. I see some questions here. Do you want me just to answer the ones that I see there, Anne, and then we can see if there are any more questions?
Yeah, please.
Perfect. Oh, there are around 250 to 300 consecrated
Yeah.
virgins in the US. Wonderful. So, do we live in community or alone? And if the latter, what type of financial support or healthcare is accessible? So, we do live, we are permitted to live in community together if we like, but it would be not the same as a religious community where we'd have a rule and all kind of follow the same horarium and things like that. It would be more for companionship and for maybe financial help or things like that. But most consecrated virgins live alone. And in terms of financial support, most have full-time jobs. And then that again would be, I know in the US it's different than Canada and some other places. So in Canada, because we have universal health care, even though it's not as good as people think it is, the we still do have that. So I don't have to worry about healthcare insurance. But a consecrated virgin in the US, for example, would have to be responsible for her own health insurance, however that comes about. So it was very romantic. The morning of my consecration, I had to go into the sacristy and sign a document saying I would not hold the diocese financially responsible for any aspect of my life ever in perpetuity. So that's definitely a consideration for the vocation. Yep.
Do you do any formation in conjunction with permanent deacons? Because I'm thinking some of their classes might be appropriate.
Yeah, There are a number of dioceses who've gone that route in terms of doing their formation with the diaconate classes, and that can certainly be helpful and it works really well in some places. I do know that often consecrated the women who are being formed themselves, their experience is very hit and miss because sometimes dioceses do it really well and they take into account that, you can't be that there are consecrated virgin candidates there, so you have to adjust how you're speaking about things or whatever the case may be. Um, but a lot of the places that do it, I think almost all of them will have additional formation that's put into place specific to consecrated virginity itself. And I do see a question here. Do you have a spiritual director in addition to the bishop? Yeah. So yes, I would say that every consecrated virgin that I know, and certainly all of them should have a spiritual director in addition to the bishop, and that would be something that would be like in formation. We talk about the internal and the external forum. So the spiritual director is the person that you can pour out every aspect of your heart to, and it remains confidential, and they can help you to really look at what the Lord is doing in the deep recesses of your heart. And then the bishop is the spiritual father that you would go to for yeah, for guidance on life decisions or if you were having challenges with something, things like that.
Yeah, Teresa has an interesting question. What's the
Mm.
youngest age for a consecrated virgin?
Oh, yeah. So, prior to Ecclesia Sponsa Imago coming out, the advice that the US Association gave, for example, was that a woman should not be consecrated before the age of 35 so that she
Mm,
could have sufficient life experience. However, Ecclesia Sponsa Imago suggests 25. So that is the youngest age that a woman can be admitted to the Ordo Virginum. Um, and so then she could begin formation maybe at the age of 22. But I would say that most dioceses, including ours, we would not admit a woman to a formation program before the age of 25 because I think it is important for her to be able to have. You need to see that somebody has been able to serenely live a life of mature celibacy for a number of years before they enter into formation.
yeah, and there's
Mhm.
another person asked, another person who's a cooperator for Opus Dei
Hmm.
wants to know if consecrated virginity is anything like a numerary.
It's similar, yes. So canonically, it's definitely different because this is its own like distinct form of
Mhm.
consecrated life, but it's similar in terms of yeah, the commitment to celibacy, the working, the relying, the seeking out of their own community, the like a number of things are very similar. Yeah. Opus
Okay.
Dei it's like its own interesting beast. And so
Yes.
I always love that question.
Well, I think that's about all the time we have because I've still got I know, this is terrible. I
Sorry.
would just love to keep it, but you answered I was making a
Good.
list of my own questions, but you answered everything, and
Oh,
that's
good.
wonderful. I really wanna urge everyone to read Erin's book and give it to people who know, may be discerning. What I really love too is some of the, you quote some of the rite in the book, which
Mhm.
I thought was beautiful because I wasn't real familiar with the rite. Uh,
Mhm.
and it's just wonderful to read. And this is a wonderful
Thanks, Anne.
vocation. And I really think that your point about the consecrated life and praying for that, as well as the priesthood and the consecrated life,
Mhm.
would be very good for us to be thinking about as
Yep.
we do our prayers for vocation.
Right, yeah, it's a practical thing.
Yes. And
Yes,
remember, Erin said you can go to the website espouse2christ.com. And if you have other questions that you'd like to ask her, you
please.
could do it right then.
Absolutely. I'm always
Okay.
happy to. Yes,
Okay.
sorry, I always get so passionate about this that I definitely usually talk longer than I intend to.
Oh,
But
it's
I'm so
wonderful.
grateful. I'm so grateful for the opportunity. Thank you,
Thank you
Anne.
so much.